When I was 12 years old, I made an animated film in 8mm and went to the Disney studios to hopefully show it to Walt Disney. But the guard at the gate, who had a Mickey Mouse on his shoulder, said, "Do you have an appointment?" And I said, "No." He said, "Then you can't come in." So I never got to show it to Disney, and I gave up animation. I was so excited working on an effects movie because I always wanted to. I always loved special effects. One of my favorite scenes of all time was the opening of the Red Sea and the Ten Commandments. And I vowed someday to be able to do stuff like that, and here I had a chance. I was driving down the freeway one day and I saw this big mirrored tanker in front of me, and I thought, wow, a mirrored spaceship would be really cool, but how do you do it? So I started experimenting with putting Mylar around a paper plate and throwing it and seeing if it looked like a spaceship. I wanted to have a fluid feeling, so we tried silver paint. We took video of paint flowing and all these different tests to see if we could come up with a spaceship. And then that's when I talked to my brother, and he said we could do it digitally.
That isn't Miami.
My brother, Jeff, does visual effects and computer graphics. He's one of the first people to do that. He worked on Disney's Tron, the first CGI movie.
As I recall, when we did Tron, there were only 4 companies in the world that could put high-resolution computer animation on film. And that was Magi, Robert Abel, and Triple I, and Digital Effects, my company. So there had not been any significant amount of computer animation put into a film before Tron. Tron was sort of the big awakening of the industry for a whole new class of imagery that's computed rather than photographed. And so Flight of the Navigator was shortly after that, so it was one of the films that came just after Tron to take advantage of some of the new development and new technology.
My God, it changed shape.
But the thing was, at that time, the state of the art was really in its infancy, and there were really no ways of making computer-generated images very easily. So we were just experimenting with all the new things we could think of at Digital Effects.
He was showing me this morphing that he did with a Tide bottle, which the Tide bottle went from one thing to another.
From a Tide bottle into a map of the United States. This is the interpolation that I was telling you about, and this was the first time that we had done this. So Randall saw that and said, wow, we can change the shape of the ship, right? And we said, yeah, sure. We were doing some reflection mapping. We had shiny objects that would reflect an environment, and so it looked like they were made of chrome. The final test was this one, which is a simulated water drop with reflection maps, refraction and reflection on the faucet, and refraction through the water drop, through the water of the background imagery.
And also he showed me reflectance mapping, where you take a background and you can wrap it onto a wireframe done in the computer. And I thought about combining those two things to make this interesting spaceship.
This is before the spaceship had been designed, so we just threw something together. So this is a rotating spaceship flying past the camera, and then this is our first reflection mapping test. You can see how the reflections are correctly rotating around the object in relation to the background. And then we took an anamorphic shot of a mountainside, and that's the element that we rendered. And then this is there's a matte for it, so then you can composite that over the background. So this was the first test we showed Disney.
I wanted to have this film have things that people hadn't seen before. So the spaceship had to be something really different.
Gas checks now. CO2 sensor circuit breakers in.
Dr. Faraday, I think you should take a look at this.
Where did this come from?
I had just graduated from the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, and I'd studied industrial design and started working at a consulting firm in Los Angeles. While I was in school, part of my portfolio was a little science fiction sketchbook I'd put together with hopes of getting work in the film industry. So I dropped that sketchbook off at Apogee Effects, an effects house in Van Nuys, and they had done work on Star Wars and some other major films. And through a nice bit of luck, Randall came into Apogee to investigate them as a potential effects house for Flight of the Navigator. So he saw my sketchbook, and I got called in to work with him. It was just this wonderful, I mean, talk about good luck in terms of dropping the sketchbook off when Randall had a chance to see it. And I also had a portfolio that showed that I could put ideas on paper, which is what he really needed at that point. He needed to get ideas for the film on paper.
He was sitting there with his book, and I said, "Hi, what's your name?" "I'm Ed." And I said, "Can I see your stuff?" He opens it up, and I saw these wonderful drawings of cars, futuristic cars that he had done. And I said, "How would you like to give some thought to devising a spaceship?" And he said he'd love to. So it's just because he was sitting in the lobby there that I found him. Turned out to be one of the main concept artists for Flight of the Navigator, and he did many, many sketches of different things, including the Puck Marin and Max character, and all the technical things inside the spaceship, the exterior of the spaceship. He just did a lot of work for us.
We sat down and talked about the script, which I had read and was just completely blown away, because not only was the story good, it was a good, wholesome family movie. It also just had this amazing amount of design, all this stuff I had just been fantasizing about doing work on. We discussed the spaceship, and he was very open to ideas. He just said, you know, I want this to be chrome on the inside, chrome on the outside, which is, you know, minimal constraints from a design standpoint, because it could be anything. You know, it could be any shape, and we definitely wanted to do something that wasn't Star Wars and wasn't, you know, hadn't been seen before, which is a big catchphrase in filmmaking. You always want to do something new that hasn't been seen. After meeting with Randall and getting the basic idea of what he wanted to do, I went to the drawing board and sat down. I had about a week, and I just sketched as many ideas as I could. And at that point, it was just sort of, it's what I call the what if phase of the design process, where you're asking, what if it was shaped like this, or what if it was shaped like this, and what if it did this? And we started, you know, exploring the ideas of just this blob of mercury. What if it was just this really simple shape that might change shapes? And so then we started exploring, what if it's shaped one form while it's static, and then another form while it's moving fast and more streamlined and aerodynamic. And just a lot of different explorations in terms of textures and things we could do just to make this an interesting, unique shape. And I mean, the chrome aspect alone, making it look really reflective, was you know, setting it apart from anything else that had been done before. So I just did probably about 6 or 8 sketch pages of these little thumbnail sketches, took them back to Randall. We sat down and talked about them a little bit, and there were so many ideas that Randall said, well, let me take a look at these, I'll get back to you. And so I took it about another week, went back to my job, and then got called back in, met with Randall again. We sat down, he pulled out the drawings, and he said, okay, I showed these to Spielberg, and he said we should, and I stopped the conversation at that point. I said, wait, you showed them to who? And it turns out that Randall, you know, is friends with Spielberg and George Lucas and all the other major Hollywood directors. And so he had taken the drawings just to bounce them off Steven Spielberg and get ideas, which to me, you know, if I had known the first drawings I ever did in the filmmaking process were going to go from my drawing board to Steven Spielberg, I probably would have taken a lot more time to do them and make them, you know, significantly better. But it was just kind of amazing to me that that level of filmmaker was the first person I got to deal with. And again, Randall was just, you know, the more I got to know him, the more I saw him working, and seeing him work on the set too. He's just one of those directors who's just like the calm in the eye of the storm. For me, it was, you know, designing the spaceship was the primary goal, and designing it inside and out. And then once we started working with this idea of it being a blob of mercury and how it could shape shift and change, I came up with the idea, if it can change shapes like that, what if the door to enter the ship just sort of melted like mercury and then became the stairs? So it could like change from doorway to the stairs in, which Randall likes, so we worked that into the film. The alien creatures were just so much fun, because again, it's trying to come up with ideas that haven't been seen before, and just, you know, strange alien creatures.
What's this one?
That is a puck marin from Bimpuka Minor. He's not dangerous.
One of the biggest design challenges was Max, the main character on the ship, because he had to be engaging enough, and he had to be interesting in terms of design, and he had to match the design of the spacecraft. So we went through a lot of iterations to get Max to his final form. And the inside of the spaceship, it had this nice geometry to it that sort of contrasted with the outside of the ship. And then we just worked forms into it that made it interesting texturally, because the outside of the ship was so smooth. For total contrast, we had chrome, but it was geometric shapes, and it had some patterns applied to it. just a lot of different things to make it sort of visually interesting, and with all the reflections inside the spaceship, it just made it really, I think, a unique experience for film goers.
You are the Navigator.
So this is the ship in its hovering mode, and then it turns into this when it flies. And this was designed by Ed Eith, and it's a maquette that we used to create the digital version.
We built physical models that we could then digitize using a magnetic digitizing. Back then you had to go through a tremendous, horrible rigmarole to get objects into the computer. You have to draw grid lines on them and then touch each intersection with a magnetic gizmo to define that point in space and that polygon, and all those polygons form the object.
They would take a pen and touch along here, and it would create a wireframe of the model to go into the computer.
And then all those polygons have to match polygon for polygon the ones on the other objects, so you can change from one shape to another. So that we had to write some software to be able to reorder the polygons so they're exactly the same. Of course, that became, okay, now we know how to interpolate, so we can make anything change from one thing to another. And it became one of the core principles of computer graphics. And this is a time when we were just making it up, we were just like writing software. We need to do it, we got to write a program to do that. There was nothing you could buy off the shelf.
We only could spend the money for ones where it was really important, like when the ship would change shape. That's when we used the digital stuff. The rest of it, when it was a small thing in the frame and it was just moving around, we would use the model.
Once we started shooting, I would be on set, of course, to videotape the environment. We would shoot videotape the environment, and then we'd put that videotape on a VAX 11750, and frame by frame take the reflections, the environment, and then turn that into a reflection map to map onto the computer-generated object, and then take that and render it and composite that over the background that they shot. And hopefully, if it all balances right, it looks like the things outside of the spaceship are reflected in the spaceship. It took a lot of planning and careful lining up of background images to make sure that the reflection coming off the spaceship matched the background and was believable. It was sort of hit or miss at the beginning, but then we figured out the best ways of acquiring the environmental light to give us what we needed for the reflections.
We composited optically. We did the digital effects by themselves against, I guess, black or white or nothing. And then we optically put those into the shots, the old-fashioned way. It was before digital compositing. It's very clumsy at that time because you were combining the digital process and the optical chemical process.
That's like a typical shot that we would deliver, and then it would be along with a mat, just the same exact pathway, just a mat area for the optical printing guy to use to composite. This is a highlight pass, so this is just a certain threshold of brightness. We would just put those elements out on a separate pass so we could put a little glow on it. When we composite it together, it's 3 passes through an optical printer of the background with a mat, and then the beauty shot insert, and then the highlight pass on top, and that's what you get.
Ah, don't get too close to those cables! Ah! Be more careful, I'm a precise machine.
Now, of course, it would all be digital. You'd have a digitized background, digitized foreground, and composite them together and off to the races. The computer would probably take about anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes to calculate one frame of a spaceship on 30, and then put it on 35 millimeter film. So, 10-second sequence would be, 3 days of computing or something. So. And then if you do that 10 times, you can go through the calendar pretty quickly. But the other thing that happened was we were running out of time toward the end of the project, and we had this whole big sequence where the ship goes into an alternate universe with big lightning bolts and huge roiling seas of color and amorphous things happening. We looked at our current pipeline and our current progress we were making, and we realized we were not going to make the deadline because it took so long for this film recorder to calculate each frame. So we sent our guy, Bob, Bob Hoffman, the guy who developed the reflection mapping for us, we sent him down to San Diego and sat him down at a Cray supercomputer, which was a big deal at the time, and he ported all his software onto that machine, and then we were able to render this whole minute-long sequence on the Cray in like 1/10 of the time that it would have taken us on our equipment. So we kind of saved the day by getting Bob to jump on the fastest computer in the world to get it done in time, you know, because of course you don't want to disappoint Disney with a delivery date being missed, you know, so we had to scramble a bit, but it worked out great.
This is that sequence we went to the supercomputer for, this flying through this entire other universe at the end of the movie. And that, as I say, that we were rendering every pixel in the whole frame, so it took, you know, 100 times longer than just the spaceship area.
A lot of times people will come up to me and say that Flight of the Navigator is their favorite movie, and I'm thrilled that they think that, and you know, they're usually people who were 12 when it came out.
Many times I've run into people that have told me that that's their favorite film, that when they were growing up that was the film that made them want to get into filmmaking, you know. It makes me feel good, you know. You had a good positive impact on people's careers like that, yeah.
It wasn't until recently when, you know, social media became more prevalent that I started to get a clearer understanding of what the film meant to viewers. Because I've connected with people from all over the place that have just, you know, gone on and on about how they loved this film as a kid, and they watched it over and over. And one woman told me that she stayed home from school sick one day and watched the film 8 times in a row consecutively. And you know, several people have said it's my most favorite film of all time. I even connected with one woman in Los Angeles who loved the film so much she always wanted a Puck Marin, and she showed me photographs of she had bought a gecko lizard that was very much like the Puck Marin creature in the film because it's the closest thing she could get. So it's really satisfying for me to know not only that the designs held up and they, you know, were convincing enough to have this become such a great film experience for people, but also just, I think it's you know, all the reaction and the way the film still holds up as a tribute to the great storytelling that Randall did with this project.